I'm Jerome Pesenti, and I lead the AI team at Facebook. So today I wanted to tell you a little bit about what are the challenges of running AI at the scale of Facebook. The first question you may ask is, hey, why does Facebook care about AI? Well, when you go to Facebook, the Facebook app, or the Instagram app, you actually have a completely personalized experience. And that personalization is done entirely through some pretty advanced machine learning algorithm using what's called sparse neural network that try to really understand, hey, what is the kind of content and ads that you want to see that interests you? So you can argue that AI in many ways powers the core apps at Facebook and the core business. Now, there are other applications of Facebook that Facebook uses AI for that are a little bit more visible. So today, we are able to use machine learning to translate languages from 70 languages to other 70 languages, over 4,500 pairs of languages in Messenger and in the Facebook app. So if you are from one of this language and you talk to someone else, the system will translate automatically. Another example is we can use AI to make our product more accessible. So if you are visually impaired, you may have seen this. There was a little bit of a bug last week around images, and you could see that the system was able actually to give you tags and description of these images automatically. So that's using advanced machine learning. That's using computer vision to do that. Another really, really important use of AI today at Facebook is moderation of the platform. As you know, there is a huge amount of content that's posted on our platform every day, and we have a duty to actually make sure that this content respects our policies. We hired 30,000 people in the last 2 years to do that, but these 30,000 people cannot actually moderate that content on their own. They actually use AI to flag and sometimes automatically take down some of that content. So we have very sophisticated AI that understands language, understands images, understands video to help us moderate what happens on our platform. Now, we do some other things that are kind of more fun and try to leverage the social graph. How do we make that social graph really useful to people? One example is if you need some advice from your friends, the system automatically identifies that using natural language processing and then plots the recommendation of your friends that are entered through comments in a map to make it more usable for you. Another interesting example is blood donation. We are actually able in some countries to match donors and givers of blood to make some matches. And we have allowed 35 million matches so far. We're also using AI to try to define the next experiences that can happen on our platform. As you see there on the left, you have an example of bot and assistant, which are becoming more and more common. But on the right, you get things like VR and AR, augmented reality, which we believe will be the future of interaction with computers. And to finish, I'll give you an example. This is a product we released last year. It's called Portal. It's if you want, a home product that allows you to do video conference. And one of the features that's really neat, it has had a smart camera that uses AI and uses advanced computer vision that is able, in real time, to identify the position of a body or multiple bodies and adapts the camera to that position. Now, as you can tell, AI really is essential to many of the product experiences in Facebook. It's really a core component of our offering. Now, I believe that not all companies are like Facebook. Actually, a little anecdote is a colleague of ours in one of the main cloud provider out there told me that their own usage of AI today is still bigger than the combined usage of all their customers. So the reality is that you have a small set of companies using AI at scale, while there's a big trailing set of companies that are still trying to attempt to use AI. And I believe the reason is there are a lot of very interesting challenges that AI raises, and I'm going to spend the rest of my presentation to highlight them. The first one is cultural. And if you're going to hear one thing from me today, it may be that, hey, you may not be ready to do AI, okay? Knowing if you're ready is asking yourself, is my company a data-driven company? Are we making decisions using data? In many ways, machine learning is an advanced way of making decisions. And to be able to use machine learning, you need to have a foundation of understanding your data, collecting it properly, cleaning it up, and especially having people who can do that. Facebook actually is an amazing example of a company that uses data engineers and data scientists at scale. A question you can ask yourself, how many product managers do you have in the organization? And how many data engineers and data scientists do you have? And if these numbers don't compare, I don't believe you're really truly ready to use machine learning. So there are a lot of questions that you can answer with data, and sometimes these questions don't require actually machine learning, and before you use machine learning, you should try to answer them using data. Now, as I mentioned, I talk a lot about data there because data is one of the key to machine learning, right? It's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data, you're not going to have good prediction using that data. So the key is to acquire and use the data as much as possible. But in the case of Facebook, let me give you some interesting stats. Last year, we were actually using 30% of our data for machine learning. This year, it's 50%, and that data doubled. So we're actually using in 1 year 3 times more data for machine learning. And the reason we're able to use now more data is not that the data changed, is that we are becoming smarter at using the data we have rather than hoping for the data we wish we had. I'm going to give you 2 examples of projects. These are really groundbreaking research that's done in my team that show you how we are trying to leverage the data we have rather than data we wish we had. The first one is called weekly supervised learning. So the traditional way of learning is to actually create data, label it, and teach the computer through repetition to perform a certain task. But that labeling process is quite expensive. And most of the data out there in the world, most of the data we have is not labeled. So in this case, we actually use Instagram data, and we use public pictures on Instagram, which our users have actually in some way labeled. They actually tag. If you've used Instagram, you know that tags are big, and people love to add tags to their pictures. Now, these tags are noisy, right? We didn't ask our user to tag to help a machine learn. We didn't tell them to teach the machine. But they are kind of relevant to the pictures. And we created a system that basically ingests 3.5 billion public images and tries to predict the tags that people will put. And by doing this, we're actually able to create the best system out there for ImageNet. If you're familiar with ImageNet, that's the task that puts deep learning on the map. And we are able to have the best result in the ImageNet, not through traditional label data, but through data that was labeled by our user. Another example, which in my opinion is even more impressive, is machine translation. So the traditional way to do machine translation is to use translators, human translators, to translate from one language to another and teach the machine how to do that. Show them parallel examples of sentences from one language to another. Now, last year, researchers in my team managed to create a system that is able to translate by just looking at language in one language and language in another language without a single example of translation. And the way it does that is by looking at words and creating what's called embeddings. So it's a representation of this word that you put in a high-dimensional space. So we embed these words in one space for, let's say, French, and then we do it for Urdu. And it happens that the relationship between words tend to be constant. It's related to semantics. And so these words will actually be able to be mapped between the 2 projections in the 2 different spaces. So we actually create this kind of learn to do this rotation, map them, superpose them, learn translation from one language to the other without ever seeing a single example of translation. And today we're using this system to do translation in languages where we don't have good data, like French to Urdu, where there's not a lot of parallel data. So these are 2 examples where we use the data that we have, a lot of data in French, a lot of data in Urdu, images tagged by user, rather than using the data that we wish we had. Now, with all this data, I mentioned 3.5 billion images, comes a lot of needs for compute. This is a diagram from our friends at OpenAI that shows kind of the biggest experiment that was run in the past 7 years. Now, this is a logarithmic scale, and it means that every year these experiments have gone 10x. The price of the experiment on the higher right is really, really high. Think 8 figures. Which means that if we go there, we're going to start looking at experiments with 9 figures, 10 figures. This is really, really, really expensive. And the amazing thing with machine learning is that scale tends to work. It does give you better results. Let me give you some example at Facebook. Okay. Now, this is about training. And on the left, it shows that we have 3 times the number of engineers this year. This is just 12 months that are doing training machine learning models than last year. So 3x increase. Each of these engineers does more training. So they actually, we trained 10 times more models this year than we were last year. And these models tend to be much bigger. And the combined effect that our computing resources need for training at Facebook went up 30x in the past 12 months. The previous 12 months, it was an increase of 5x. I can tell you that this is keeping me up at night. Now, the next challenge is that to be able to do this training and run AI at scale requires a really different kind of engineering, a different stack. Okay? This is a quick snapshot of the stack that we use today at Facebook. Now, let me actually give you some examples of things that are really unique about machine learning. In some way, with machine learning engineering, we are reinventing a new type of engineering for which we need to reinvent the practices. So there's two things in regular engineering that people know they have to do. One is source control. No good engineering team, software engineering team today will do software engineering without doing source control, and they do good testing. Well, in a machine learning environment, it's actually much more complicated. On one hand, the problem of source control is that in the case of machine learning, data is in some way source code, right? When you create a model, it depends on your actual architecture and your machine learning architecture, but it also depends on the data you fed, which means that if you were to control the source that was used to create that model, you will need to also track the data that was used. That's actually very, very difficult to do that, and nobody today has really a great solution for it, including us. Another problem is testing. In regular software engineering, you know exactly what you expect out of your program. But machine learning systems tend to be ambiguous because they try to resolve ambiguous tasks. So it's unclear what really they need to do and can you test it very, very accurately. You need to reinvent a new way of testing. Source control testing, we need to reinvent these things. We need to reinvent new practices for machine learning. And even places like us, Facebook, have not figured that out yet. We're trying, and we're helping to try to create systems that we actually release to the rest of the industry. So you may have heard of PyTorch. This is one of our big efforts that we're trying to use. And we're trying to create a system that bridges from research, allowing people to explore new models, to putting it in production, and trying to solve these problems. And we try to do that with the community and releasing as much as possible to the open source community so other people can contribute to it. Just recently, we released PyTorch Hub, which is a way for people to share models to other part of the community. Now, these are 4 technical problems, but I would say the last problem I want to highlight, the last challenge, is even more important, even more difficult, is the idea of doing AI responsibly. Now, let me tell you a little anecdote. I mentioned earlier this really smart camera that can follow you. Well, one member of our team, who is Nigerian American, actually, her name is Lade. She'll be actually on stage right after this session here on Mainstage. And she noticed that the system, actually, in the early days, was working better for white male colleagues than for her. She was noticing that when she was in front of the camera didn't pay attention to it, didn't recognize her, right? And what it turns out is that the engineers had actually trained the system with pictures of people who looked like them. And she realized that the distribution, right, of demographics of people used for training was not representative of all the diversity of the population of the world. Now, in this case, that was a simple fix. And she managed to push the engineers to actually create a diverse set for training. And we came out with a system that actually worked relatively well for all the demographics out there. But there are a lot of really, really difficult issues around AI. The challenge with AI is that it uses data, and data come from people, and people have biases. And AI works at scale. And the big danger of AI is to reproduce, in some way to 10x the biases that are present in our society, right? And handling this, in this case, was around inclusion, but there are other problems around fairness. Are you fair to all the population? Are you moderating their content in the same way? Are very, very difficult. It's a process that we are learning to implement in our organization. It's something you need to think about when you collect the data, when you label the data, when you create your algorithm, when you look at how you act on the output of these algorithms. It's really a process. Very, very difficult problem. It's the last problem I mentioned, but really maybe one of the most important problems to solve for us. Anyway, I hope today I convinced you that AI can be really, really important for a company like Facebook. I hope you'll try to make AI as important for your company as it is for us. But I hope I also show you one of the challenges, cultural, data, engineering, computing, and ethical that AI brings. Thank you.
Jerome, great presentation. Thank you. Please join me. So you lead AI research and applied at Facebook, so you really are overseeing the strategy. I noticed you left, as you just said, the bias question till last. It has emerged as one of the most important issues of this event, starting from the very beginning with focus on woman in AI, where we had 200 women show up for a breakfast around that issue of gender. Just curious, so we can delve into it just a little bit more. What are the dangers, the various dangers of bias beyond maybe just this example that make you realize it's one of the most important?
I mean, I'll give you another example, actually a paper from my research team that came out recently, which was around object recognition, this task I mentioned around ImageNet. What people notice, first of all, that all the main systems out there, including our own, but also from the other cloud vendors, all have cultural biases. They work well for Western society, but they don't work well for other society. Like, what's a wedding? When you ask a computer to recognize what's a wedding, it works well when it's a Western wedding. It doesn't work when it's an African wedding or an Asian wedding. So there's tremendous bias. That sounds innocuous, but that means that all these visual systems that are used there work better for a certain part of the population and not as well for others. That's an example. Another example is when you try to promote products or you try to sell products, right? Are you going to reproduce the biases of the seller? Are you going to try to optimize? Imagine if I advertise for jobs. Will I advertise computer science jobs only to white males, or will I advertise them to more diverse population?
Yeah, and so how do you feel in the process that you have now? Do you feel it's industry leading? And I'm just wondering if there's any other examples, precedents of large companies that have been
I believe multiple companies are looking at this. I do believe that Facebook is industry leading, but we are really, as we say in our company, 1% done. It's really something where we are figuring out the scale of the problem as we go right now. And we're trying to do it as responsibly as possible, but it's the beginning of the journey.
Yeah, great. So we don't have much time, so we're going to just go through some of the top line questions that came up for your presentation. So you mentioned cost keeping you up at night, 30 times more cost. This has been a question at the event. We've been hearing more about the cost of actually doing AI, the cost-benefit ratio. Where is that going, right? If it's keeping you up at night, do you have any answers? I mean, is the sleep in the nights rendering any answers?
I don't know. In some way, we are going to become more disciplined because there is a bit of a point of view of just throwing more data and more compute. It does work, which is quite remarkable. So it works, you can do it, it gives better performance, but be more cost conscious. So putting cost in the equation is something we're starting to do. The other is really optimization is really important. And the distinction between software and hardware there is really tricky. I'm a software guy. For me, it's quite difficult to understand that. I always abstracted out the hardware. It's most likely no longer the case, right? So hardware becomes important, and you need hardware that's going to optimize for some workloads for machine learning.
Related, but not quite, the 30,000, I think you mentioned you hired, was it in the last year, 30? Check my notes.
That's 2 years, yes,
30,000 moderators, yeah, it's just another 30,000 number. So at what point does that start plateauing? I mean, do you see another 30, because we have the elections coming up, we have deep fake video as an issue, and in terms of the moderation challenges that you have. What are you doing to get ready for next year?
So you cannot solve the problem just with humans, okay? But you cannot solve the problem also just with computers. It's really a problem that you need to solve with both. And that means investing in having the best well-defined policies, having people who can implement that, and having computers who learn from this action of these humans, and trying to make the AI system better and better and better. And the election of next year is top of mind for me. Maybe that's a second thing that keeps me up at night. And it's try to create a system that can catch the bad behavior early on.
Yeah, great. So just maybe one or two more questions on Facebook, and then go to the audience's needs, right? Because you talked about cultural challenges, but you mentioned, I think, in a blog post in January, the AI technical strategy really kind of, you're not an AI first company, right? So Microsoft, Google have said versions of this, but it's subservient to connecting people, right? And that is one of the five areas you've talked about where AI is being used at your company.
It's really about protecting, connecting, and empowering people. Yeah, that's our vision.
Right. So if cost is keeping you up at night, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What's the most exciting AI application that you're using?
I mean, for me, it's two things. One is, in my team, we use AI to do good for the world, and we want to make our products better for the world. So it's really about creating an AI that optimizes your experience to make it more valuable to you. Is it making you a better human? Is it making you more informed? Is it making you happier? That's the kind of thing we want to do. An AI that really understands you well, so it can provide the experience that makes you a better human. That's one of the things that keeps you alive. The second is, what I mentioned earlier, is augmented reality. I do believe augmented reality, which cannot happen without AI, will be the next frontier of human-computer interaction.
Yeah, and Zuckerberg's been pretty strong on that for a couple of years now.
That's right.
I wanted to make sure we didn't skip over the news from today. Just a couple of hours ago, there was an announcement that you've led research in conjunction with CMU, that you're now beating some of the best poker players on the planet. So can you talk a little bit about this AI that you've built?
Sure, it's an AI that's
why is it important in the scheme of things?
So, it's an AI that's able to beat actually players at the a six-player Texas Hold'em. So it's a very interesting scenario because it's the first time really an AI plays into a multiplayer game. Usually it's one team against another, one player against the other. And it's also a very interesting game because it's limited information, right? So you have to guess what the other person has. You have to have a mental model for that. And that person bluff, and you need to bluff as well, okay?
Yeah.
So it's an AI that can bluff, an AI that can interact with multiple people at the same time. So what's very interesting about this, even though it's a game, right, and we're not planning to make money on, on online poker with this, but it's to create this environment where you have an AI that can learn in a more realistic scenario. Right? We are all about more realistic environment because we deal with that every day. For example, we have a lot of adversarial behavior on our platform when people are trying to upload videos that we don't want and modify them. That's a scenario that's similar to this poker game, where you have multiple people trying to go after you using strategy you don't know about, and you're trying to guess where they're going to go.
Yeah. Okay, so time, I can see that ticker going down, but I just want to come back to the audience, right? So one of the things you did is you threw a little stone into the pond and made some ripples, because we've been hearing from the Microsoft CTO talking about how you don't really need to be technical because you have all this auto ML, and you just came and said, hey, are you ready to do AI? So the whole conference we've been hearing, hey, it's ready, you've got to do it, you've got to have a top-down policy right away, otherwise you fire the person if your person in charge of the agenda doesn't get it done. You've come along and said, are you ready? And I think earlier in our conversation you were talking about a ratio of data scientists of 1 to 1, roughly. Can you talk about that ratio? Have you talked about that publicly much? And is that kind of some sort of magic recipe that you have in Facebook?
I mean, I'm not going to say a number, but I would say that the number of product managers and data scientists and data engineers should be comparable, yes. Yeah. I think that's a really healthy environment. And the question of, it's not just about data scientists, it's do you have a data strategy? Actually, I was chatting with Swami, who was on stage earlier before the meeting, and he was saying, even with this customer, the first question he asked them, do you have a data strategy? Are you collecting the data? Are you connecting that data? Are you putting it together? Are you cleaning it up? Do you have processes? So sometimes I think people see the shiny object with AI. I was in B2B before being at Facebook, so I know all about it. AI is the shiny object. People want to go there, but often you have to kind of build a foundation first to be able to use it best.
Yeah. Do you have any tips on how to build that foundation? Because I think there's a lot of focus now on that consultant layer, right? So you've got the technology, but it feels like the pain. And I think, in your previous, just a few years, you were at IBM, kind of leading the AI strategy for IBM, which does this, as a business. But what, any parting, in the last minute, we have any parting advice for these maybe mid-tier companies, or even significantly sized companies that don't have the scale, as you mentioned, of say the top 5 or even 24 companies that do this at scale, about how to implement this policy?
Actually, the way I would do it is, I will hire first data engineers and data scientists before I will hire ML engineers. And actually, even data scientists themselves are becoming, to some extent, ML engineers. So have this focus first on data. Get a chief data officer right before you get a chief AI officer. Get this focus in your strategy. Clean it up. Understand how you can use it. Get get your baseline. When you do AI, you need a baseline. How well are my systems working before you try to replace them with more intelligent systems. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. And just one more question on PyTorch, right? It's a funny question to end on, but I just know there was so much here. Any results from the PyTorch efforts, right? You've really focused that as a framework to allow easy deployment from experimentation, and also the PyTorch hub. It's gotten quite a bit of recognition in the community.
Yeah, I mean, the growth has been
any results
amazing.
specifically?
Actually, it has been beyond all my dreams, I will tell you that. So last year, we really, when I came in, actually, it's one of the first things I did on Facebook is saying we're going to put all in on PyTorch, and the results have been phenomenal. And the reason is, It's a system that was designed outside in rather than inside out. It's designed for users,
Yeah.
and that really paid out.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Applause, yep.